welcome to Cosmos with Bailey. I'm Bailey and I'm a clairvoyant psychic medium and spiritual healer based in New Zealand. And this video I did a similar video to this one called The Spiritual Ego and Healing, but I felt to do a more clarified video on it and just explain some of the things that can happen and how we can decipher the spiritual ego. So with the idea of the spiritual ego, but we're going through a collapse of the ego consciousness as we speak, but that is in the collective consciousness. And what a lot of people will do as they awaken is they will sort of create a spiritual identity. Many of us have been there, but we're sort of evolved out of it. And it's very, very common about now to have people take on the guise of spirituality because it makes them feel better in the body, and it also releases the responsibility and the pressure of taking care of oneself in the physical reality. So it also releases responsibility and self-governance, as sometimes it is easier to create a spiritual identity rather than really take a good look at yourself and your current life experiences and what needs to be done to move yourself out of those. Because of the current density on the earth, spirituality is created a type of identity around many so they can cope with the realities of being on the earth. And so for many, what people will do is they will create a spiritual ego or a spiritual identity that's not really truly who they are, that is a cover-up for them to cope with the realities of the everyday real world. And what will happen with the spiritual identities and the spiritual ego is that it's so much easier to cover up things with love and light and love everyone. And I know I might trigger some people with this one, but usually people who are peddling the idea of love and light and holding space for other people's trauma most likely have some very deep embedded childhood trauma and teen wounding, and have a lack of boundaries and a strong sense of self. It's very, very common with the spiritual identity, especially women, but also men, to just give yourself over to everyone else and become a bit of a savior for the essence of humanity, or believing that you need to help people with their trauma. And I'm here to bring more light to the earth. I'm here to do this. This is my mission. When really you're not responsible. And a lot of my teachings with my healing modules is working with people who are very disempowered. And it's about building up self-respect and self-governance within the spirit so you can create a life with your spirit. Because we have many experiences on this earth that are very disempowering, and we can sort of lose connection to our spirit, and that's where the spiritual ego comes in, to create a sense of safety in the body, but it's very dissociative. And so with people with high levels of trauma, and I would say very difficult childhoods and teen experiences, you just don't know what someone else or what abuse someone else has experienced. I also know people who have had relatively good lives will use the idea of spirituality because they are bored or they want something more special and glamorous in their lives that makes it more exciting. A lot of people don't want to, a lot of people paint the idea of spirituality because they cannot cultivate or create their own excitement or fulfillment in their own lives. Yes, okay, so yes, and a lot of the times it's an identity. It's not really who they truly are. And when you really begin to embody the spirit and the essence of who you are, via the spiritual realms and into the vessel, you really come into the earth realm and experience yourself very consciously in the body. And there's just no need for spiritual identities because it just feels so inauthentic. when you're truly embodying your spirit, you don't need that type of identity. Okay, so let's talk about how we can decipher the spiritual ego. And this is a part of discernment, and this isn't about pointing fingers at other people. This is about seeing the reality on the earth and empowering ourselves to choose right and just things for our spirits and look for more empowering ways of being. So a lot of the times when someone is embodying a spiritual ego, I've sort of seen that they are very dissociated from the real world reality. And that's most likely because they're dissociated spiritually from their body and they just don't know it. It's very common to be dissociated from the physical body and not be fully in it because of childhood rearing and how we've experienced family dynamics. It's very common for the spirit to leave the body if you experience childhood trauma and have no idea that you're not fully living in your body. It's very, very common. And so what happens with the spiritual ego is that it makes yourself feel temporarily better being in the body. And so what happens is that a lot of the times the information that when someone is speaking from the spiritual ego is sort of regurgitated from everyone else around them, or it's sort of stuff that they'll take bits and pieces from everyone else and then call it their own spiritual teachings. That's very common on Instagram, spiritual influencers, that they'll just regurgitate. They'll go and take classes or courses of other people's teachings and work and then use that information for their own self-gain. But it's under the guise of the spiritual ego. And the spiritual ego, it is self-gain, but it's very not unconscious. I think it depends on where someone's experiencing themselves, but there is an element of self-gain, and I want to see, it's almost like the ego is very juvenile in many ways, and it wants to be seen in a certain light. It wants to be seen as slightly better than others, but it may say things like, oh, I'm no better, but there'll be feelings of being a little bit more special. There will be lots of regurgitation going on, and the information is very unrelatable. And a lot of the times people who haven't cultivated high levels of discernment and maturity will go on and sort of follow very unrelatable and watered down regurgitated information. And that's collective consciousness as well. So if you go back and watch the lower psychic realms, I talked about collective consciousness and spirituality. And the information you're talking about is really unrelatable. It's starseed stuff. And when I see starseed information, I just think this person is caught in childhood trauma, when the spiritual ego will create fantastical and magical illusions of reality. It will create fantastical realms of existence like New Earth because they can't cope with being in the body. It's very common. Everything, so unrelatable information that is not applicable to the everyday world and what you're experiencing in your body. The guise of love and light. So love and light, when I see that, is a trauma response. I work with trauma often, and I have high levels of medical intuition. And you see this with very narcissistic people. It's actually a really embedded trauma. I don't like using the term narcissist. And they've created a survivalist persona to cope with the amount of pain in their bodies, and it's very common. And so the idea of love and light makes Earth feel better. It makes the body feel better. And it's a coping, the idea of love and light is a coping mechanism in the everyday real world. But you can cultivate love and light within your spirit and your vessel by grounding and embodying your spirit. But that takes a lot of spiritual work. And it's very easy to create love and light without really understanding what that truly means. A lot of the times the spiritual ego, they have little to no awareness of trauma clearing and the importance of childhood and teen trauma. And what happens is that, there's no real world spiritual healing or clearing taking place. Instead, it is just a lot of regurgitated teachings, regurgitated information, and stuff that sounds and feels very lovely and very love and light and fluffy. There's a fluffy element to the information. Talks of shadow. So for me and my understanding, there is no shadow. We experienced ourselves in a collective consciousness at the fall of Atlantis, where we experienced the ego consciousness, and we experience ourselves in a darker or denser realm. And now we are evolving out of that realm into a more loving and stable and fulfilling realm of existence on the earth. But that takes time. You have to clear trauma in order to feel a more love and light in your body. You cannot bypass that process of spiritual evolution. So the spiritual ego will just jump straight into spiritual teaching and guiding without having any necessary understanding of what that really entails. Usually there is a very big Saviour Complex operating. I am this person with this information. I have a mission. I am the one to share these teachings. It's very, you know what I mean? It's a very Saviour Complex, and it's very easy to pinpoint once you've seen it. And I've seen someone just blatantly use someone else's teachings, or what they'll do is they'll get a book. They'll get someone else's channeled book, and then they'll teach and regurgitate that information and make a business out of it. That's very, very common, what I've seen on the spiritual community on YouTube. It's very common to click into someone else's channeled information or a book or whatever, take it as your own, and then regurgitate the information and make a business out of it. It's very, very low morals, it's very low ethics, and it lacks integrity and a backbone to it. So be very careful. That's a Saviour Complex, and people wanting to be seen in a very certain light. Sometimes when I see people like this, I think you've obviously been a preacher or a pastor in one of your past lives. That's just what I think. I'm like, oh, you're living out a little bit of your karmic juju right now. And it is a true spiritual guide will be looking to get you empowered and standing on your own 2 feet and not reliant on their words. A good spiritual teacher or healer will always be questioning you, will always be getting you to think for yourself and living out your own life. So you got the Saviour Complex. That's pretty easy to pinpoint once you understand it. There's high levels of immaturity and how things are run, and high levels of spiritual immaturity. And when I say that, it's just not understanding the realms, the psychic realms, how to move someone else into the higher realms, how to remove trauma and density from someone so they can be more empowered. There's very little understanding of how to truly move into the higher spiritual realms. It's a lot of word vomit. It's a lot of word salad. It sounds light and fluffy, it feels good, and usually it'll feel good to people who are holding a lot of trauma. And it's very common, the childhood trauma, because of how we have experienced these unloving and hierarchical family dynamics. So if you want to start anywhere in spiritual healing and clearing, you want to start with childhood trauma. Because that will remove immaturity out of you, and as you move into higher realms of spiritual maturity in your vessel, because all your life force will be caught up in childhood trauma and abusive stuff that you experienced. There will also be a type of guru mentality. I am the one with these teachings. I am the one with all the wisdom and the knowledge. I came to the earth to guide these people. And I think, what were you doing in the times of Jesus? There's a lot of people who were around in the times of Jesus and sort of gave their power away instead of focusing on themselves. So there's a guru mentality that operates. Uses other teachings I've always talked about. A lot of the times the teachings are over complex and unnecessary. They're not really getting to the root cause of anything. There's a lot of word salad and just messages for humanity and how can humanity be better. When I see people talking like that, I look at them and I think, you need need to go away and you need to focus on yourself and your own life path. A lot of the times what people will do, instead of focusing on their own crumbling reality or their own relationships or their own family dynamics, is that they will go and try and help other people instead of focusing on themselves and creating a really joyous life for themselves. It's very common to have some type of savior complex, most likely, or wanting to help other people from childhood trauma, or wanting to make yourself feel more important by trying to help other people. And a lot of what I've seen, healing groups or things like that have been created are coming from someone who wants to feel like a savior for humanity. So you've got to be really careful with stuff like that. Little to no boundaries or discernment with the spiritual ego. And when I talk about boundaries or discernment, that means there's no understanding of the psychic energies or realms, and what truly is, and also the love everybody mentality. We are not yet at a place on this earth where we are ready to be loving and respectful to everyone. There are many different realms and realities of existence. There are many different people experiencing many different things right now. And discernment and common sense is very much needed whilst we are still here experiencing ourselves on the earth. We can have love and understanding and respect for someone else's soul pathway, but it does not mean that we need to be involved in a collapsing chaos or dark night of the soul of someone else's. Dark nights of the soul and chaos is set up for people to really move out of that victimhood mentality. And sometimes people really need to go through these types of life situations in order to really understand that they can stand on their own 2 feet, especially if they are in the victim mentality or victim consciousness. Very dark nights of the soul are set up to move someone out of those experiences. And at the end of the day, everyone is responsible for their soul pathways on this earth as a grown, mature adult. You're not, no one incarnated to take on another soul pathway. It just sounds like when people do that, they most likely have some childhood trauma operating in the need to save other people, or maybe they tried to save a parent or caregiver. So, and the love everybody mentality is just not a reality right now, and you're really wanting to focus on getting into alignment with jobs, groups of people, and friendships that are more in alignment and resonance with where you're experiencing yourself. I've talked about that. No awareness of realms. There's no true spiritual empowerment. They haven't sort of gotten their life in a state where they're really enjoying it. And sometimes when I see people who are really embedded in the spiritual ego, they haven't really been through enough challenge in the physical realm. There's a very big difference between someone who has been through a lot of initiation and has the wisdom and tools to be able to talk on that versus someone who hasn't really experienced harsh psychic initiation. There's a very big difference in those teachings and energies. And a lot of the times, people who are very spiritually empowered have been through an incredible amount of disempowerment in order to understand true spiritual empowerment versus true disempowerment of the spirit. And they've moved through those realms into the higher realms by themselves. Therefore, no one is responsible for someone else's soul journey. Lots of costumes. They believe themselves to be otherworldly and that they are above the human existence. That's a very big sign of the spiritual ego. At the end of the day, we are all human beings. It does not matter how glamorous you paint yourself with spirituality. You still poop at the end of the day. You still eat your food like everyone else. And there's a humbleness. But also I've seen people use humbleness in the spiritual ego. Lots of savior complexes, titles, specialness. There's a lot of fantasy driven ideology, especially if you've got a lot of trauma backed up with the spiritual ego. It's very ungrounded. It's not applicable to the everyday world and what we're experiencing. And it is a type of, again, when I see people who are very embedded in the spiritual ego, I 100% feel like they have not cleared their trauma. And I can guarantee you that their lives are probably not going in a very nice way. Their life force is focused on other things and not themselves. And if you think about it, everyone else is embodying their own spiritual energies or their spirit, and it is their responsibility as to what's going on within that aura as a grown adult and what you're cultivating. You're not responsible for what someone else is cultivating. And when we start moving into these higher realms on earth, you really begin to understand that everyone has to make the journey into those realms on their own terms and their own soul pathway. And it's very rude to interfere on someone else's soul pathway in that way. Okay. Anything else I need to say about the spiritual ego? You're just looking for high levels of authenticity, honesty, integrity, ethics, and morals. That is the basis of a very good person. It does not matter if they're spiritual or not. You'll be able to tell a difference if you have come across someone in the spiritual ego. I would also deeply question if you're getting readings from people and if they say stuff like, what happened to me? Oh, and if I had something happen ages ago. I paid a lot of money for something, and they said that my guide was too powerful for me to work with right now. And as I sort of matured more after that experience, and if people are saying stuff like that, do you really think the spiritual realms would say that to you? That's a very good indicator. If you're going online or getting a reading, do you think the spiritual realms would give you all the answers? No, they would not. You're having your own experience. You're in the unknown. Do you think the spiritual realms would say stuff to you like, oh, like just deeply question? Because in the higher spiritual realms, there's very high ethics and morals and integrity in the spiritual realm because they're not embodied, just have a think about that. And if the spiritual realms would really be saying that to you. Okay, thank you so much for watching. That was a long video on the spiritual ego. Thank you very much for watching.